we did not have to nationalize everything. We did not have, it's one thing to nationalize land, which is the truth in Tanzania. Land in Tanzania is public. It's a very different thing to nationalize farms. And we went to things like nationalizing little things like farms. That was a mistake. Nationalizing.
Guys, so I don't know if you guys know about Julius Nyerere. Julius Nyerere was kind of like what might be called the first president of Tanzania. And before Tanzania became independent, Julius Nyerere before then had been giving speeches abroad, you know, really arguing for the independence of African states and, you know, especially in his own area in Tanzania, the East African community, on how they have to come together to really fight against the colonial forces that actually had enslaved their people. And then now, I think this interview was actually conducted in 1985 after, you know, he had actually been out of power, so to speak, to discuss his legacy as Tanzania's founding president. He actually is giving a really perfect example of what's really going on now in South Africa. And he's actually arguing on how that the biggest mistake, one of the biggest mistakes anyway, that, you know, the version of socialism which he tried to really push in Tanzania, which is called Ujamaa. Those of us in academia understand this really, really well. He's tried to really bring a kind of socialism because he thought that because Tanzania had actually just now escaped, you know, colonial, you know, oppression. He actually thought that, you know, the alternative to that capitalist thrust that colonialism had used to enslave its people would be socialism. And so he really bought into socialism a lot and really customized a version of socialism that would fit Tanzania's own, you know, situation. And he called that Ujamaa, all right? So now he's actually arguing that one of the biggest mistakes he made, you know, in that really affect and almost, I think it even collapsed the economy at some point, was the fact that they nationalized the farms. All right. So in other words, he didn't argue that the nationalization of the land, they actually had much impact on the economy. He actually said that in Tanzania, land is actually something that is public. All right. Land is actually sort of like in the hands of government, so to speak, all right? But when they moved to nationalize the farms, which he thought was unnecessary, that's where there was a major shock in Tanzania, because in nationalizing the farms, they realized that they didn't have efficient management and the education that was needed to manage farming. Farming at the level of the African subsistence farming wasn't capable enough to handle the level of industrial farming that the world in the 1960s in South Africa, in Africa generally, had become. And actually now it's even worse now in 2025, the kind of industrial scale farming that many Western and, you know, African countries are engaged in right now will not be able to sustain the population growth we've seen in our countries and all that, as it did during the time we had subsistence farming. And so Julius Nyerere, I think this is almost like a lecture to the left-wing you know, parties in South Africa, if they would listen to this video I'm about to play. But he's actually arguing for the strengths and the weaknesses, the pros and the cons of nationalization, all right? And this, you know, this is actually one of the core pillars of the EFF. They speak about nationalizing the banks, nationalizing many industries anyway. He argues that there has to be a balance, so to speak, between nationalization. There has to be a balance on how, you know, the states has to have a certain balance on the private industry, that one must not dominate the other, otherwise there will be shocks. So in this video anyway, he actually speaks about how the mistake, one of the mistakes that he made was in nationalization of the farms in Tanzania, and that had actually tanked the economy at that time and made socialism watered down. A lot of socialist thrust and socialist elements which he tried to introduce to Tanzania actually failed, so to speak. And so this is why in South Africa, for example, the ANC, EFF, MK have to really be careful in this experiment with socialism, and, you know, how probably, you know, they might have to act or probably be cautious in terms of nationalization. They're just lessons anyway that South Africans, all loving South Africans, if you really love South Africa, you really have to listen so that you understand, you know, this whole element with socialism and how socialism has this capacity to really infuse in an economy that is not yet get, you know, where it should be, where it should actually operate in much more productivity, much more provision of industrialization, and to bring jobs for the people, to nationalize things as sensitive as the farm, as we are seeing right now with this argument back and forth about the Expropriation Act and all of that. It really needs to be treaded on really careful steps, so to speak. But anyway, let's quickly listen to Julius Nyerere as he gives, you know, a lecture. This is a master class, mind-blowing. I had to watch the video almost 2 times because you could see the intellect of the kind of leaders we had at that time, not the leaders we have today. I see across many of our African states and, you know, the youths of Africa, there's a sentiment that is slowly brewing. If you get into TikTok, you can see that the youth are just waiting for the right time, you see. But you see the likes of Julius Nyerere at time, when you listen to this interview, the intelligence, the kind of articulation, clarity with which he you know, understood global affairs and all that, for me is mind-boggling. Let's quickly listen to Julius Nyerere break down how socialism in a way really you know, almost devastated Tanzania, and the mistakes they made as socialists who were trying to really save their people in South Africa, in Tanzania, which had actually just come out of colonialism. And share your thoughts in the comments.
The list of external economic factors which have caused enormous problems for Tanzania is very long, factors for which Tanzania cannot be held responsible. But what internal factors, what policy mistakes, if you like, have also contributed to the current crisis?
A number have, and since I'm speaking to friends, I can admit, and we have made a number of mistakes. I think one of them I spoke about yesterday. Only yesterday I was speaking about one of them. We nationalized whatever industries we had. We have few industries in around 67 when we became independent, and around 67. One of the major, and industrially we really did not have many industries to nationalize. But we had a very highly developed sisal industry based on estates. It was already beginning to run into some difficulty because of the world prices. The prices were going down. And we nationalized it. It was a mistake. It is quite clear it was a mistake. We did not have the management, the local management, to manage those farms. We nationalized some. We didn't nationalize all the farms. We nationalized some estates and left others, and this has proved the others which we left, which we did not nationalize, are doing much better than those which we nationalized. Although, of course, they had to function in the same economic situation in the world, and the basic problem was that we simply did not have sufficient management. The management was not well developed. In this case, we made a mistake. That's one mistake. It's one example of the type of mistake we made. I think also institutionally we made mistakes. We abolished the cooperative movement. I think we shouldn't have abolished the cooperative movement. We have now.
Why did you abolish the
cooperative?
We were
very impatient. We were very impatient. There was some corruption in the cooperative movement, some inefficiency, and we thought because we did not have enough people, the same problem of managers, if we centralized, we would use the few people much better than if we simply decentralized and allowed a multiplicity of cooperative unions. It was a mistake.
Instead, you established parastatals to
established the parastatals, believing that there will be few, and therefore the few trained people we have would do a better job. Well, they didn't. They did not do a better job.
Why not?
Once again, centralization. It was a mistake. To centralize, you need a lot of ability to be able to centralize, and it's better to commit the mistake of the people themselves with their little experience and continuously gaining their experience, running small cooperative unions. It's better to commit the mistake there than to run the risk of centralization. When you make a mistake there, the mistake is is very serious.
But nationalization, Mr. President, gaining the control of the means of production is a very major principle in socialism. Does this mean that this part of socialism didn't suit Tanzania, actually?
Oh, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we did not have to nationalize everything. We did not have, it's one thing to nationalize land, which is the truth in Tanzania. Land in Tanzania is public. It's a very different thing to nationalize farms. And we went to things like nationalizing little things like farms. That was a mistake. Nationalizing land is one thing, so that land is public, and if a person wants land, the government is not going to be able to say, we can't give you land because the land is not public. And so that is fine. But I'm saying when it comes to things like nationalizing farms, we should have said, no, we don't have the management, and in any case, it is unnecessary.
The Arusha Declaration called for a welfare society providing education, health services, and clean drinking water to all Tanzanians. It's an ambitious and very noble intention indeed. And Tanzania has really made remarkable achievements within these fields, thereby increasing and improving the standard of living for the people, as well as the life expectancy of the population. However, social services do cost a lot of money, not only to build, but also to maintain. Was enough attention paid to getting money for the maintenance of these services? One critic I talked to says that Tanzania has a socialist consumption, meaning that everybody is entitled to social services, but has little or no capitalist, in quotation mark, production to pay for these services. Do you agree with this?
Well, I know what he means, but I mean, we were a poor country, and we opted for socialist policies. We did not opt for a welfare state, because to build a welfare state, you need the means to build a welfare state. It's also true, by implication, to build a truly socialist society ought to be a developed society. It's a just society. And it's very difficult to abolish injustice where you have poverty, because poverty itself is a basic injustice. But nevertheless, we couldn't say, let us develop this country capitalistically as if we were in the 17th century or 18th century, and say, wait until we have a highly developed capitalist system before we can think of justice for the masses of the people. I mean, this was an option. We decided that the little we have, and it's a choice, the little we have must be shared. And one of the easiest ways to help the poor is to educate them. And so we decided. I mean, it was an option. What went into education could not go into building houses, or could not go into building a factory. That was a choice. And we were told it was wrong, education was not productive. And we said, it is wrong to postpone even the little welfare that the people can get. And so we gave education to our own people. We are allowing the private sector to continue in those fields which are allowed. Naturally, they can expand. What they cannot do, what we must not allow them to do, is to dominate the economy. The economy must continue to being dominated by the public sector, and the state must organize a good machinery for controlling the private sector. We cannot allow the private sector to dominate.
But are you satisfied with the performance of the public sector?
They could have done better. So could the private sector. I mean, each part could have done much better than they're doing now, and we must continue to make sure that the public sector and the private sector, but in particular the public sector, because we want it to be a dominant sector, should be run as efficiently as possible. And this is a continuous problem.
Coming back to the Arusha Declaration once again, it gave priority to agriculture, admitting that too much emphasis had been put on industry until 1967. However, in the years that followed, particularly in the 70s, it seemed like raising of industry, even heavy industry, an industry which, in the words of the Prime Minister, was heavily import dependent, got priority at the expense of the agricultural sector. Today, I believe this is recognized as a mistake. But how did it happen? Were you under pressure from donor countries, or under pressure from Western or Eastern industrialists, or was this your own initiative?
First, let me say it was our own initiative, and then go back to the origin of the question. The Arusha Declaration gave emphasis to agriculture, not because before that there was a lot of emphasis or investment in industry. It's not true. What kind of industry did we have before 1967? What we are trying to correct in the Arusha Declaration was the attention of the leadership. They were thinking development is industry. We did not have very much industry, but to them, if you were going to develop this country, then of course you've got to put your investment in industry. And we were saying, this is wrong. The basis of our development is agriculture, and we've got to give sufficient attention to agriculture. We didn't, but that is the correction we wanted to make. Not that we had been investing a lot of money in industry, and then we after the Arusha Declaration, we tried to switch. We were paying a lot of attention, theoretical attention to industry.